talking about the interplay of the various gaps and how it tells a different story than. Oh shit, are we already
Yep.
live?
And we're live. Yep. Hello,
Okay,
everybody. I'm Mystery.
I am Dalton Wardman, the Authenticator, and in case you didn't get it from the otherwise, under normal circumstances, behind the scenes conversation I was having uh, before we went live, today is the duality of man and statistics, where we will be discussing the various statistical gaps and how they don't necessarily mean what you think they mean, to paraphrase Indigo Montoya.
Yeah. And I think that we should start this off with the probably most famous statistic about the disparities between men and women, and that is the infamous pay gap myth.
The wage gap, lightning, spooky music, and so on.
Yeah. So, for those of, first of all, everybody's probably already aware of this by now, but in case you're one of the few people on Earth who isn't, uh,
And somehow
the
stumbled
wage
on a
gap
men's
is
rights show
essentially a
anyway.
myth that says, yeah, but the wage gap is a myth that women are paid, was it 70, 75 cents for the dollar for every dollar a man makes?
Yeah, and to be fair, the actual gap is not a myth. The part that's a myth is that this is a sign of women being paid less for the same work, derp, and therefore sexism. That's the part of the wage gap that's a myth. The actual statistics do bear out that women in general make 77 cents or so on the dollar of what a man makes. The problem is that women negotiate for less money to begin with. They work less hours and or more flexible hours because they often also, and here's the kicker, do jobs that are more preferable to do, whereas men work longer hours at jobs that are less preferable to do, and by virtue of negotiating with their employers from the off, um, they can often get pay raises regardless. But
Yeah.
here's the other kicker. Despite apparently only making 77 cents on the dollar of a man, women make 80% of the consumer decisions, which one has to wonder where the fuck they're getting the extra money from. And that will lead us in nicely to our next gap. But let's finish the summarization of the wage gap before we get there.
Yeah, I mean, women, it's not just that they're being paid less, because, first of all, it's a crime to pay men less than women if they're doing like literally the exact same amount of work at the same job. That's literally a crime.
Yeah, in every Western country, and I can think specifically of in America, we have this thing called the Equal Pay Act, which was passed in 1963. And
Yeah,
I
thing
don't
is,
know if you guys have noticed, but that was literally 60 years ago now.
like, a job will usually offer like a base pay rate, and I think it's men usually like will either ask for more money at the outset, or like after working there for like a couple of years they'll ask for like a raise, which women usually won't. They'll wait until somebody like gives them a raise. And first of all, a company is not going to give you a raise if you don't ask for it, because why would they pay more if they don't have to? And second, like, if hypothetically they could get away with paying women less than men, why wouldn't they just hire all women if it's going to cost them less? Like, companies will do anything to increase that bottom line. If they could get away with paying women less than men, what incentive could they possibly have for hiring men?
Also, there are some circumstances, quite common circumstances, mind you, where women are actually individually making more money, but because of the way the statistic is calculated, it looks on paper like they're making less. I.e., if you have, let's say, five women all making $25 an hour, and you have 10 men making $17 an hour, and we average this workplace by all the money made by women and all the money made by men, it will look on paper like the men are making more than the women, while de facto the individual women in the individual positions are making more. And I bring this up because here's the other neat little detail that they don't exactly go into with regards to the wage gap. Women in general favor or wind up in middle management or HR or other bureaucratic positions far more often than men do. And those positions tend to make slightly more than your average working stiff in the, cubicle farms or the labor positions. And yet, because there are fewer women in general in these positions, because there are fewer positions like these, even though women on average occupy those positions almost to a 90% variation than men do, there are fewer women in higher positions making more money than men, but there are more men in low wage positions making more as a group and making less individually. So that
But
is
you also have
also
to,
one of the counterparts of the wage gap.
you also have to consider that men are more likely to work overtime. They're more likely to put in those extra hours to earn a bit more money, whereas women usually want to enjoy their time more and aren't necessarily willing to put in as much overtime as a man would be. I mean, and also there's also a lot of the dangerous, dirty jobs like plumbing,
That no woman
sewage
wants to do
workers,
ever,
garbage men, oil rigs who make a lot of money, but they're not like the most pristine or the most respectable
or have
positions
a
or
massive
the most
negative
prestigious positions.
or have a massive negative impact on the man's overall quality of life. And that's the other thing. Most jobs occupied by women contain flexible hours, usually some kind of non-monetary work privileges like free lunches or the stereotypical day in the life TikTok videos spring to mind, and almost to a fault, all of those are young 20 something women who are high achievers in college and therefore were able to score an aristocratic position. Let's just not beat around the bush about it. So when you factor in the actual costs of all of these non-financial privileges that these managerial positions get, it actually costs more for a company to have your day in the lifers or your modern day aristocrats than it does for them to have working stiffs. It just so happens that because the working stiffs prefer to actually see that investment in their bank account rather than in extraneous quality of life improvements by way of the workplace privileges, they get more hard currency, and women get enjoyable jobs that they actually can find life affirming and fulfilling, whereas men get the jobs that no one in their right mind would do and probably won't do as soon as we figure out how automation fucking works or how we can manufacture drones to do these jobs so that no human being has to be crippled by them.
But
But never mind.
you also have to consider that men have the burden to earn placed on them by society and by their families. It's like even women who make a lot of money still want the man to be the provider in the relationship. So the guy, like, even if you may not necessarily like his job, he'll stay in it if it's paying him enough so that he can, take care of his family and provide for them. Whereas women are more likely to quit their jobs if they're not happy with them. But yeah, I'm sure you've seen the stories of men who are literally working soul crushing, just jobs that they freaking
Life
hate
destroying jobs
because
that will lead them to an early grave, but that will add two extra zeros to their salary at the end of the year.
yeah, for the sake of their families. And women don't have that
or even just
burden placed
sometimes
on
their
them. I'm not
girlfriend if they
saying that
don't
there
even
are
have
no
families
women.
yet.
Yeah, I'm not saying that there are no women who don't provide for their family. I'm just saying that the pressure of it is vastly on men.
And even if we look at it outside the traditional role of protector and provider that men are usually expected to take on, even a woman who doesn't need a man to provide for her in any way whatsoever, the average, stereotypical middle-aged girl boss, you know, basically Angelica's mom from Rugrats, if anyone remembers that show. Even those women want men who make a lot of money or have a lot of prestige in any number of ways because provider or no freaking provider, they want someone who can pull their weight and then some because hypergamy. Because unfortunately for society, women have this thing we call sentimental value, i.e., the value of the person is in the person themselves, not in what they do. Men, on the other hand, are considered scum unless and until they prove their worth by doing shit. And also, let's be once again, bring back up the thing I mentioned earlier with the spending gap. If women on paper make 77 cents of what a man makes, and yet make 80% of all the consumer decisions, one has to wonder where they're getting the lion's share of the money necessary to make that 80% of all the consumer decisions. And the answer, of course, exists in this famous classic joke that I think every man has heard at least once in their lives. A brother and a sister um, are talking with each other. The sister always has money despite never having worked a day in her life. The brother is constantly working but never seems to have money in his pocket. He finally gets fed up with the situation and asks his sister, I work all the time, you don't work at all. How is it I never have money and you always have money? And the girl confidently and calmly responds, it's because I have a boyfriend and you have a girlfriend. I.e., a large swath of that extra 30 cents or so that men get on paper usually go to their girlfriends, wives, and or families. I.e., when men spend the money they get on paper, they spend it not on themselves usually, but on other people, usually women.
Or children.
Hence, women don't need to earn a certain percentage of money in order to get money given to them for doing nothing but being a woman.
Yeah, I mean, not only that, but they talk about oftentimes how there are fewer women CEOs or fewer women executives than men. But the thing is, in order to get to those positions, you literally have to like dedicate your early life to that job to a ridiculous degree to the point where you are missing out on so much of life for the potential that you could have a secure future. Like a lot of guys, they go for that, but they may not get the top spot. It's highly competitive, and like there are some men who are willing to basically shave off pieces of their life in order to get that spot, but a lot of dudes aren't. I'm not.
Yeah. When there's one position and 100 applicants, surprise, surprise, you wind up with one person very, very happy and 99 people going, dag nabbit. Also, to a large degree, this is once again equalized by the fact that men might be the CEOs more often, and even that is slowly but surely changing. Look at, your Oprah Winfrey's and J.K. Rowling's for evidence of that. But men might be the CEOs more often, but who are the CEOs answerable to? And anyone who knows anything about corporate politics knows where I'm going with this. The CEO, no matter how powerful he might be, is always answerable to two departments more than any others, i.e., de facto, despite the fact that on paper they have less overt power, they have more manipulative power. which are the HR and PR departments, the human resources and the public relations departments. And those departments are stocked almost to a man by women. So even though the women have less overt power, they have more covert manipulative power. And gee, I wonder if this is a trend that we can trace throughout all of human history or anything. Cough, cough, the Lady Macbeth syndrome, cough.
Yeah, I mean,
Or in the modern context, the Hillary Clinton syndrome, cough.
like a lot of people would love to be in a top position, but not in the top position because being in the top position, like you have way more responsibility, and it puts a target on your back.
Yeah, the wolf is always at the door. When you're the top dog, everyone is gunning for you.
Yeah, and like the buck stops with you when you're in the top position, and a lot of people don't want that level of culpability.
Whereas the ladies in the HR and PR departments, once they get there, they are basically set for life because no one can possibly unseat them without becoming persona non grata by way of, you would dare question me and my diversity credentials in this HR and PR position? Well, maybe you're just immoral and therefore you will lose your job over this. And yet the HR and PR departments are on paper unimportant enough that no one is ever going to go and gunning for them, unless they happen to be an absolute bad lad like an Elon Musk. Good God, I love you, Elon.
That's one of the rare examples of someone having so much they literally don't even have to pretend to care.
like, like Elon Musk is the one modern day aristocrat who goes, yeah, I'm a modern day aristocrat, but that means I also have the responsibilities of a modern day aristocrat. Whereas all the other modern day aristocrats spend so much time convincing themselves they're not modern day aristocrats, specifically so that they don't have to exhibit the same responsibilities of, the classic noblesse oblige that aristocrats always used to have.
We
Honestly,
talk,
given the choice between the two, I would take an Elon Musk over a day in the lifer from TikTok any day.
we were talking about the wage gap myth and the disparity in earnings. I think this is a perfect opportunity to roll into another topic: the homelessness between men and women, because they claim that men are earning so much more than women, but men are 70% of the homeless population in the United States of America, whereas women make up a mere 29.
And it gets even worse when you talk about the unsheltered homeless specifically, because women take priority in homeless shelters. Unfucking surprisingly, because again, men are valued as instruments and appliances based on what they do. Women are valued essentially as art objects that are sentimentally valuable for their own sake. Not saying that we shouldn't value women for their own sake or that we shouldn't value men for what they do, but maybe we should extend both types of value in both directions here. Maybe women should be valued slightly more for what they do, and men should be valued more sentimentally on occasion. But yeah, men make up similar percentages of the Fortune 500 CEOs and the homeless. And also, many of the men who are in those Fortune 500 CEO positions and in the highly paid but absolutely miserable, lower trade rungs of society, they get there essentially by selling 4 years of their lives. And how we get there is we look at yet another gap, the gender lifespan gap. Women live 4 years longer than men on average, or at least that was the statistic last I looked. The reason being, largely, is because women, as we previously stated, take up more cushy, privileged, or life affirming jobs, and men do literal and figurative, back-breaking, soul-destroying, life-shortening amounts of labor. And for this 4 years that they literally sell to their employers, they only get a 30% pay raise, most of which will, as per the spending gap, go to the wives and girlfriends of these men rather than themselves.
You think
It's a
about it,
lot different when you look at all the statistics than just that one that looks like it might favor women, isn't it, folks?
yeah. I mean, it gets even worse when you consider that, if these guys are, married and they're, breaking their backs at work, their wife could one day just decide to divorce them. That's a good possibility considering, I believe, what is it, half of all marriages end in divorce, and women make up like what, 80% of all divorce initiates.
Yeah. And also similar percentages, I would imagine, of people who actually financially benefit from divorce. Because you would think that if a man is working his ass off in these life and body destroying jobs to provide for his family and or his wife and girlfriends, that once the wife and girlfriend stroke family were not in the picture anymore, he could stop and find a job that was more fulfilling and less life destroying. But we have a system set up such that even after the woman has gone off the man, even after she's taken the kids and family and up and left him, he still has to stay in that body and life and quality of life destroying job because he has to pay alimony, child support, and or legal fees.
I never understood these alimony payments because it's like, okay, the wife is initiating divorce, she wants to cut ties with him, but still wants to act like a parasite and leech off this man's money. Like, sorry, but if you're the one initiating the divorce, you shouldn't then get to like suck like the life and the resources out of this poor bastard.
But you're forgetting the evolutionary psychology rules. You're assuming that men and women have equal sentimental value, and as we know, a woman is always sentimentally more valuable than a man. Therefore, she gets to be buoyed up and looked after because she is valuable and we don't want to hurt one of the valuable people. And he gets to work himself to death because we don't want to encourage the unvaluable people to think they might be valuable.
Yeah, all right. First of all, let's be honest here, Dalton. After a certain age, they're not nearly as valuable.
I mean, it on de, de facto maybe, but instincts are a hell of a drug, man. We might find older women sexually less valuable, but let someone beat the fuck out of a little old lady and not get beaten to death by an angry mob. I doubt it will happen. The only way older women can talk themselves out of the innate sentimental value that women have is by being the literal worst human beings it's possible to have, by literally being the embodiment of the evil crone. Like you literally have to get a typhoid Mary or a what was the woman who was like the landlady who would use her tenants as serial murder victims. I forget her name, but you literally have to
Yeah, I
do
don't know.
that, or you literally have to drown your own children or grandchildren before we even begin to think, okay, maybe we should take this woman card away, and that's only when, as you say, they've already expended their sexual usefulness. So if a young woman does those things, you're still going to get people on her side. I mean, look at the frankly frightening feminist and like extremely gynocentric traditionalist people who supported Amber Heard on the basis of the woman must always be the victim and the man must always be the perpetrator because reasons.
I mean, if you really want to get depressed, just look at uh, women's relationship videos on TikToks, and you will see some of the most evil things you could possibly imagine.
And again, I just want to point out all those day in the life videos. Find me one that features a male, and then find me one that features an actual like somewhat masculine looking male, because I'll wait. If you find me a day in the life type video with a male getting the same treatment as those kind of, early 20 something women, it will probably be the most effeminate non-masculine male you can manage, and he'll probably be the aforementioned annoying twinkish hyper flamboyant gay type person, or they just won't exist, period. Because even the hyper feminine, hyper flamboyant gay twinks still take less precedent than the saintly neotenous white women.
You know, we mentioned divorce earlier and divorce rates. I think now is a good time to bring up the unfortunate topic that men are four times as likely to delete themselves as women are.
Yeah. Now, the inevitable screed that comes back is always, oh, but women attempt it more. And I think I alluded to this once when we did the duality of men and suicide not too long ago. But I'm sorry, but on some level, as tragic as attempting suicide is, and we should definitely seek a world where no one ever feels the need to attempt it. There is, unfortunately, and we're not allowed to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. There is, unfortunately, a certain percentage of narcissistic, cluster B, borderline people who will literally, in the name of making themselves the pure saintly victim, attempt suicide for attention. And those people, by the way, are scum on a level that cannot even be overstated. Because the people who actually, for real, find themselves in such a horrible state in life that they feel like suicide is a preferable option, those people are to be empathized with to the highest degree as empathy can be managed. But the people who cheapen the actual victimhood of those people by doing it for attention are the worst examples of self-centered human beings it's possible to exist.
You mentioned women talking about the four times as likely to commit suicide as men, but my viewpoint on it is at least those people are still alive. The men are actually succeeding with their attempts to kill themselves,
Yeah, and
which is
again,
absolutely
the
tragic.
the difference is also in the motivations, whereas many times a suicide attempt is for attention and a suicide success is because my life is so many different flavors of awful, my existence has no value, I can't take the pain anymore, so I'm just going to remove myself from the equation for both personal reasons and often, and we mentioned this in the duality of men and suicide, the thing that doesn't get talked about nearly enough with suicide is it does often have a altruistic rationale to it, i.e., if you truly believe you're the lowest form of life on Earth and that you make everyone around you miserable simply by existing, the most humanitarian thing you can do if you're convinced of that is at least I can remove myself from the equation and hopefully not drag people down with me anymore. And people who get in that mindset have the most sympathy for me because number one, I've been in that mindset. I've been in the I only exist to be a burden. The world would be better off without me. I should literally just remove myself from the equation and make everyone else's life better in doing so. I've been in that rash. I've been in that headspace before, and goddamn, I know everyone goes, "Oh, suicide is the coward way out. People who commit suicide are so weak." Yeah, no, that if that is your motivation for committing suicide, i.e., I make everyone's life worse by existing, so I'm gonna do the courageous, heroic thing and remove myself from the equation so I can make people's lives better, or at least stop making their lives worse. That, as nihilistic as it might be, is a very courageous and heroic mentality. And by the way, if anyone listening to the sound of my voice has ever thought that, if you are selfless enough to think like that, then you are definitely the one set of people who shouldn't be committing suicide. The people who should actually be committing suicide are the people who fake it for attention. Like if I could snap my fingers and make sure that all the people who actually committed suicide were the narcissistic twit who attempted to for attention, and made sure that all the people who failed to commit suicide were the people who were doing it for altruistic heroic reasons, that is a trade I would make in like a heartbeat.
We are so going to get flagged for that.
Yeah, yeah, I know, but there's only so much we can do to dance around the algorithm. We're a men's rights show after all. Like, Deb.
I mean, you also have to think that sometimes it's not even that they necessarily view themselves as a burden. It's just they're in a very terrible situation that's crushing them, and they're trying to find a way out of it, but everything they try
Yeah,
just
I just
fails
can't take the
and
pain
fails.
anymore is also a common rationale, which again, while not nearly as laudable as the aforementioned, I'm going to be altruistic to spare everyone else the pain. I still have more empathy for the world is so miserable I just can't take the pain anymore people than I do the I'm doing it for attention people.
You know, one of the situations um, regarding male suicide that I read about is that this guy, he's a good guy, worked hard for his family. One day finds out his wife's been cheating on him. They get divorced. Uh, she leaves. She gets to keep the kids, and they're supposed to have visitation rights, but she will not allow the kids to see him. And even when he tries to call the cops and says like, "Hey, like this is mandated by the court, like this is my time to see my kids," the cops still won't do anything, and he has to pay
The power of the
alimony
woman
to this
card
woman.
compels us.
He has to pay alimony and child support to this woman who doesn't allow him to see the kids that he's still paying for, and because he has to pay all this money, he's like basically like destitute. And unfortunately, he ended up taking his own life.
Yeah, I know of a guy who um had a child with a woman, um and she started pulling every cluster B trick in the book to prevent him from seeing the child. And from what I've heard, which granted I've heard this from him, but from what I've heard, from what he described to me, I was able to put together that this woman might be skirting the edge of Munchausen syndrome by proxy because she swears up and down that this kid has asthma and that this kid had to stay home the entirety of COVID rather than just the lockdown portions of COVID. Um, and that he could never engage in after school activities or sports or anything because of his various health things. And she tried every nasty trick in the book to make him seem like the villain and get his visitation rights taken away. So yeah, those Those people do exist. Granted, to be fair, albeit to a much less degree, deadbeat dads also exist. It must be said that not every man is a victim, not every man is trying to do the right thing. But on balance, I would say the ratio is probably 1 to 4 deadbeat dads versus um deadbeat dads versus people who are actually trying to do the right thing or being genuinely victimized by the aforementioned lack of men's rights, basically, or
You
even
also,
just empathy and consideration for men.
and also another stat that's deeply concerning is the rise in paternity fraud, which, in my opinion, should absolutely be illegal.
Yeah, as should the cases where it's not fraud, but nevertheless she kept a condom of his and chose to impregnate herself without his consent or knowledge, and then later on got him on the hook for child support and everything else.
For those of you who are necessarily unaware, paternity fraud is where a woman is a child by one man, but says it's the child of another man and makes a second man, pay for this child and goes after him for child support. In unfortunately, too many cases, this actually happens when a couple is married, where the wife will have an affair with somebody else, get
And
pregnant,
he
and
won't
then say the
know, and he'll
husband's
just take
father.
care of the child. Yeah.
I think it's even if he finds out and tries to divorce her and tries to not have to pay for that child, the court will basically make him pay and continue to pay for a child that isn't his. And like sometimes even in cases where they know who the real father is, they'll say, well, you're more able to take care of that child, therefore we're still going to make you pay. So the guy who actually did the deed gets off scot free, and this poor bastard who was betrayed by his own wife is still going to be on the hook.
Also, even if the surrogate father develops a bond with the child that isn't his and actually does step up to the father role, there's still the potential of, I'm going to divorce you, I'm going to take the child, you will never see him again, but you will still nevertheless be obligated to pay for him financially. I.e., even if you're not biologically the father, but still care about the child, even you can be subject to the treatment of, you will never see this child again, but you will pay for him, even if you're not even biologically the father. So the child isn't even yours, and even if by some miracle you still care about him, you may never see him again, but you will pay for him just like you're the biological father regardless, because we say so.
Well, one argument that I've heard regarding that specific situation is that because he is not the child's biological father, he has no inherent rights to visitation.
Never, never mind if someone is filling the father role, which honestly, I mean, the cold hard, evolutionary biology aspect of it is always going to be what it is. But personally, I think the person who is actually in, involved in filling the role of the father, i.e., actually fathering the child, at least on some level, has more rights to the child than the biological father, especially if the biological father is a non entity in the child's life. Because what's more important, the biological connection or actually fulfilling the role of being a father? Granted, both are important. I'm just saying, which should the world or society care about more? Someone who's actually willing to be a father, i.e., fill the role of a father, or someone who is biologically connected to someone but does nothing fatherly about it?
Well, in an ideal world, the biological father would be the one taking up the fatherly role, but in our current society, unfortunately, people don't necessarily live up to their responsibilities.
And again, I don't want to paint a disingenuous or belittling portrait of all men or even most men. Again, I still say the ratio of men who genuinely care or otherwise are genuinely victimized by a lack of men's rights issues or empathy and concern for men in general is much higher than the deadbeats. No matter what the feminists say, no matter what the traditionalists say, there are more men who would, in a perfect world, see their children and care for their children than there are deadbeats. But there are still deadbeats.
You know, we just talked a lot about you know, the statistics regarding marriage. Let's move into dating because there was a poll done by dating apps. I believe it was I don't know.
Okay,
It
Cupid.
was either yeah, I think it was OK Cupid, where I believe it was men found 50% of women to be above average in terms of attractiveness, while women found 70% of men to be below average in terms of attractiveness.
80.
And people are just, oh, it was 80% of men to be below average in
Yeah,
attractiveness. Now,
they
people
claim
say that
that's
that's just
80-20
women.
statistic. That's a statistic for you.
Yeah. People say that it's just women having standards. And no, by the very definition of the word average, they have to be delusional when it comes to attractiveness
Yeah, but
because you
no,
can't have 80% of people being below average.
that's not what they mean though. They mean
You just can't.
valid. Yeah, but what they mean when they say that is men worthy of attention or men who are valid and worthy of consideration. That's what that means.
I know,
That's
but
where we get back
I know
into
that's what
my
that means.
yeah. That's where we get back into my
But
theory that when feminists say equality or when feminists talk about equality, they mean equality with men they consider valid, which is the top 20% and even more so the top 1% of that 20%. They literally consider men below that threshold to be blank male, blank pieces of human, blank pieces of male DNA, basically. Non men, non-entities, non-valid men. And that's the disturbing part of the way men, or rather the way women view men versus the way men view women. I would even argue that the statistics for the male half are somewhat skewed. And if you truly gave men the option, you'd almost see an inversion for men. And you'd almost see an inversion of the 80-20 rule. I think in general, 80% of men consider or 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 at the very least most men consider 80% of women worthy in the sense of being above average, whereas women view literally 80% of male humans are non-men, which is where where the phrase real men comes into it, and the only men they see as men are that 20%, and even more so that top 1% of that 20%. That's why feminists say they want equality with men. They don't mean male humans, they mean the valid top 20%, the high achieving men. And that's also why they consider men to be all assholes, because a large percentage of that 20% of men, in order to be that high achieving, need to be somewhat sociopathic. And because they don't consider all male humans to be men, they project the behavior of that 20% onto the rest of the 80%, which are otherwise invisible to them. Oh god, it gets very dark when you look at it in like a Socratic logical point of view. Like actually examine the framework of like the
yeah,
instinctive framework.
honestly, honestly, like social interactions on the internet are blamed to this. We as human beings, I believe, we're not designed for instantaneous global communication. Like we like that is not something we can handle it. You can see it's having a
Yeah, our
negative effect
instincts
on
still
us as a
think we're in the
species.
Stone Age, our resources are not, kind of thing.
Yeah, and so you go online and you may have a good life, but you're comparing your life to like the lives of other people you see online. And a lot of first of all, a lot of that stuff is just bullshit that they're putting on to get
Yeah,
attention.
it's glamour,
And
basically.
second off, it makes you unappreciative of what you have. Like they did an experiment where a bunch of people were given a T-shirt for free, and they were all excited, like, "Hey, free shirt, cool!" And then a bunch of people were given a free T-shirt, but they were given the option of choosing, like, what color shirt they got. And the people who were just given a shirt were all happy, but the people who were had the option of choosing were not happy because they all thought somewhere in their mind that they should have picked a different color shirt.
And this is something that we can find consistent even in our closest primate relatives. There's the famous um, grape biscuit experiment with I believe it was capuchin monkeys, i.e., a certain percentage of monkey or a certain group of monkeys was given like a food biscuit um, for completing a task. And then they saw another group of monkeys being given a grape for doing the exact same task, and the monkeys with the biscuits they basically went on strike because it was like, well, we get generic food biscuits for doing this task, and those guys over there get grapes. That's not fair. Read because apparently in the value system of monkeys, grape is more valuable than food biscuit, which I at the very least can understand that. So like this is something so instinctively baked into us that we can demonstrate it in our closest animal relatives.
Yeah, specifically with the T-shirt experiment, it's about choice. Like they choose a T-shirt, but they feel that they should have chosen a different T-shirt, even though they're still both T-shirts and provide the same function of covering your body. They
I, I, I
because
mean,
the choice was
maybe
there,
maybe I'm a
they
weird
made their
outlier,
own.
but I wouldn't have accepted the shirt. Period. But that's just me.
It's just like you could have something that's just as good as the thing that you think you're missing, but because you don't have it, you want the other thing more.
Well, here's another way of looking at this, which is they've done studies and they've demonstrated that like on a evolutionary level, human settlements were around like the maximum amount of people that humans can neurologically care about is around 150 people. And for most of human history that was fine because there were only a couple million people on the entire fucking planet, and most of the time you were stuck in your own little corner of the world, which was again around 150 people. And now, instead of comparing yourself to the 150 people that you are exposed to in real life, i.e., instead of confining your standards of what makes a good person or what makes a successful person to the 150 people you're most commonly exposed to, now those standards are being applied on a scale which involves basically you can compare yourself to the 7 billion other people on the planet, or at least the ones with, first world technology and access to the internet. Like, instead of comparing yourself to the 150 people in your village and going, yes, I am probably the best person of these 150 people in this village, you're being forced to look at the 3 billion people online and go, well, I was the one, I was the top dog in my 150 people group of, my 150 people village, but that guy in, a country that I will never have the opportunity to experience has a solid gold throne, and now I feel, and now being the top dog of the 150 people I grew up with is no longer good enough. No.
like the more people are able to see what potential options are out there, and I say potential options because even though you can see it, doesn't make it a valid option.
It also doesn't necessarily make it real, as we just went over. Sometimes the things are edited with filters and glamour and basically any. It, basically, this is yet another potential screed about maybe we should ban makeup. Maybe that would make the world a better place if we could just
I
ban
mean,
makeup.
first of all we should. It's bad for your skin.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm talking about in the philosophical sense of if we didn't have the option of glamoring up as much, would that equalize some of this disproportional applying the standards that used to work fine when you were dealing with a control group of 150 people that don't work on the scale of now I'm comparing myself to literally every other human on the goddamn planet and also several humans that don't even exist anymore because now we have enough conception of history that not only can we compare um ourselves to the 3 billion people who currently exist who have access to the internet, but we also can compare ourselves to everyone throughout the entire history of ever, and also the 3 billion people who currently exist and have access to the internet. No wonder the equations are giving us weird results now, because we've altered the control group size so much. We've altered the variables so much that of course they're giving us weird numbers.
But yeah, I've also been thinking that you know a lot of our modern technology and comforts give us the ability to ourselves, whereas before, human beings were forced to deal with the harshness of reality. They had no choice. It was either deal with the problems that actually exist right in front of you or die. But now we have created a safe enough and comfortable society where we're actually able to delude ourselves into thinking that be a certain be like this person
You're breaking up a little
or
bit there, E. You're roboting horribly.
was I yeah, sorry, StreamYard is telling me that my signal isn't that good. But I was
Yeah,
saying that modern.
yeah.
How about now?
I think you're okay now.
Yeah, basically, I was saying that we've basically created a society that's so comfortable we actually are capable of deluding ourselves into believing like outlandish fantasies like we are more physically attractive than we are, or that I see this person on a cruise ship in the Caribbean, I should be on a ship in the Caribbean, or like basically we are allowing ourselves to seek things that are outside of our normal purview.
More fundamental than that. In the aforementioned time period where you actually had to deal with the things right in front of you or die, there were actual evolutionary pressures, i.e., if someone existed who literally was just a evolutionary dead end, the world took care of that for us, and therefore that person's genes got deselected out of the gene pool. But now that we've basically solved all the problems that our Stone Age ancestors had to deal with, what are the evolutionary pressures of the modern world? The only evolutionary pressures of the modern world that exist are not tangible physical um, forces or the consequences of tangible physical forces. They're basically whatever remains of our original instincts from the Stone Age being allowed to be taken to their final terminus, their furthest logical extreme. And unfortunately, it's the same way with our food instincts of like, you know, prior to the advent of the supermarkets, you needed to seek out the highest fat, highest sugar food stuff you could because famine was likely to be a thing at some point and you wanted to bulk up as much as you could. But now that we live in a world that is so um, anti-scarce with regards to foodstuffs, taking that instinctive drive to an extreme of the most fat and the most sugar results in an obesity epidemic because famine is no longer a variable in this equation. Um, and the same is true with regards to our sexual preferences. You wanted someone who was as tall and as strong and as rich and affluent as you could get because that was meritocratic. But now that number one, there are ways to fake that shit, and number two, we're not dealing with the aforementioned selection group of I want the most hypergamous mate of these 150 people. Now I have access to a selection group of 3.5 billion people. So I I necessarily want the best out of these 3.5 billion people. Well, unfortunately, the best of 3.5 billion people are kind of rare because three and a half billion is a goddamn big number, and anyone who finds their way to the top of that heap is going to be a one in several billion shot. And so you can't have 9,999,099 people all going after one in 3.5 billion person. Because even if we lived, back in like Genghis Khan's day, and that one in 3.5 billion person actually wanted to sleep with 999,099 people, it's probably evolutionarily not a good idea for them to do so, especially because anyone that high achieving is also likely to be somewhere on the cluster B spectrum and be a sociopath. And evo- evolution might say yes to that on the basis of where you can have a lot of children, but I think for the actual merit of continuing the species, there being however many offspring of a sociopath in the modern world, not exactly a good thing. Genghis Khan was useful for when during the Middle Ages when childbed death syndrome was common as shit, but now there being 3.5 billion sociopaths born from one sociopath that had sex with 999,000 women, um, might fuck over the species' ability for example, maintain instinctive neurological empathy, which we kind of might need in the not too distant future, perhaps next Sunday AD. It's gotten to
God
the
willing,
point
we
where
survive that long.
our desire for high achieving partners might actually um, remove some of the evolutionary merits that we looked into in the Stone Age.
Yeah, the thing is, like, women are going for these ultra high achieving guys with absolutely no hope of actually locking these guys down because these guys don't have to get locked down. They literally have all the options they could ever want in life in
Yeah,
terms of sexual
the
partners.
one man everyone wants has all the options, whereas the millions of men that no one wants basically get fucked over, but we don't even care about those because they're invalid for some reason. They're non-men, so who cares? Who gives a fuck?
Yeah, and now you're seeing a lot of percentage of women who are in their 30s, like early 30s, mid 30s, who are miserable because those ultra high value men don't want them anymore because they want women who are younger, like early mid 20s, and a lot of the guys um, who like they were interested in before don't want them either because they spend all their time like sleeping around with high value men. Like guys have an innate, I believe, disgust reflex for a woman who is like ultra promiscuous.
Yeah, and here's the other variable, as long as we're talking about it in like an evolutionary scale here. Back in the day, this might not necessarily have been a problem because those women who wanted the high value man and therefore slept around with him would have gotten pregnant by him and would have therefore given birth to his offspring, and therefore they would have already won the evolutionary lottery by getting to be impregnated by the most high value men, and then lots and lots of those, lots and lots of little clones of that high value man would therefore be running around. But now, because of things like the birth control pill, abortion, um, and things of that nature, you can essentially win the evolutionary game and choose to opt out of it. And then you wonder how you lost the game. Like, it's one thing to never win the game. It's one tragic thing to never ever win the game. But it's another thing entirely to win the game and then talk yourself out of keeping the prize you won as a result of winning the game, and then proceeding to bitch about not winning the game. Like, no, you won the game. You won the game several times. If this were 1970, before birth control and before abortion became widespread, you would have three children by this dude by now, or three children by three separate high value men, and you would have won this game several times over. But because you had the option of abortion and birth control, you essentially nerfed your own win state, and now you're wondering how you didn't win. Gee, I wonder if it was your own choices that done did it. Uh,
The best way that I can put it in a simple analogy, it's like when you walk into a casino and you go to the blackjack table. You could keep winning at blackjack until you've got like a decent sum of money, but then you keep trying to win more and more and more until eventually you just go bust and lose it all, and then you're wondering what the hell happened.
it's especially if you just decide at random, as per the abortion and birth control example, to just give your money back to the dealer for no reason. Like, rather than walking out of the, rather than even converting some of your wins into money, you're just like, I don't want any chips, so here, dealer, take them back. That's abortion for you. That's I've won the game, but I for some reason don't want to keep this thing I won, so take it back. Oh hey, now I don't have anything that I won. How did that work? Again, it's what self-sabotage looks like on an evolutionary scale. Evolution wants you to get pregnant and to facilitate the furtherance of the most viable genes. Well, it kind of necessitates on an evolutionary scale that if you get pregnant by the most high value men you can get, you stay pregnant and then raise that child. And if you choose not to, then don't be surprised when you've had three or four different options to win the game, chose not to, and then wind up not winning anything. Like, you already won. Never mind the people who never win. You won three or four different times and chose not to keep the thing you won. Not our problem anymore.
And also, here's the thing: like they'll often like get an abortion because they say it doesn't fit into my plans because they want to succeed and get as much for their lives as possible, whereas it should be you have a child and then you do everything in your power to make sure that the child succeeds as much as possible.
I mean, again, if we're playing, not even advocating for traditionalism here. I'm just looking at it from a soulless, like, how does one win the game of evolution perspective? Like, that's how the game of evolution is won. You invest in your offspring, and then your offspring become a superior version of you, and then that happens a few more thousands or a few more millions of times, and then we wind up with a superior species. That's supposed to be how this works. But never mind. When you have a reject win button, which is abortion or birth control, it sort of fucks with the variables again. Like, never mind not having any evolutionary pressures other than social ones. That would be fine if we were just obliged to keep if we were just obliged to keep the results of those choices. Like, women could be as hypergamous as they wanted, as long as they were obligated to keep the child and therefore raise the child and therefore evolution is served. But when you have the option of birth control or abortion, whoops! Now that you know iteration of that high value male's DNA, it doesn't exist anymore. It's not admissible to the gene pool, and now it's an evolutionary dead end. Which, by the way, is a shit long term strategy for keeping the high value men around. If all the high value men's children get aborted because the women who he impregnated just decided not to keep the child in defiance of evolution, then the next generation is going to have even fewer high value men, which is going to make the women even more miserable. And it's going to become a death spiral, literally, of the entire species, probably.
Ed Brewer makes a good point. He says, I've seen women pass on high value men, they even pass on decent men. A lot of women choose fixer up men, which is a good point. And, you know, for everybody knows that, women like drama, like they like basically chaos essentially. And they'll often describe a man as like too nice or boring. What that man actually is stable. He is a stable individual who doesn't have a bunch of chaos and drama and nonsense screwing up his life.
Well, keep in mind what we're talking about when we're talking about high value men and low value men from an evolutionary perspective. We're not talking about what you or I would consider high value men in terms of like morality. We're talking about the instinctive rules of hypergamy, which is the tallest man, the strongest man, the most affluent man, the most beautiful man, physically speaking, etc. So that's often why the difference between that's often why there is the difference between what morality or logic would dictate as a high value man, like philosophically, versus what instinct says as a high value man, which is literally just the most alpha, tallest, strongest, most rich, affluent man I can get my hands on because frankly, even though I think morality is emergent from evolution, and that's one of the genius parts of the human species, at bottom, evolution doesn't care about abstract philosophy. It cares about what is the best combination of genes, period. And again, that would work even as long as the women who got pregnant by those evolutionary high value men were at least forced to keep those high value men. But now with birth control and abortion fucking up the gene pool, even the high value men are getting slowly but surely deselected out of the gene pool because having children with as many women as you want is, in theory, as per Genghis Khan, the correct answer, evolutionarily speaking. But if those women aren't forced to keep those children, or at least not obliged to keep those children, um, then you basically wind up having as much genetic impact on the species as the person who never fucks ever. Because if you get no offspring, you are no longer admissible to evolution. Them's the rules.
All right, we've been going for a little over an hour, and I actually do have something coming up. So, have any final words about the stats that separate men and women?
Just because one statistic might favor men over women doesn't mean that that proves the patriarchy theory. You have to look at these statistics in context. And very often when you look at these statistics in context, it paints a picture of women being valued more than men and men being seen basically as human appliances and women being seen as actually sentimentally valuable. And if we could address that, we might actually make some progress in the whole men's rights thing. But unfortunately, gynocentric species, so we're probably never going to. We're still going to keep trying, though. We're still going to keep pushing that square peg into that round hole as long as we can. Because this has been the duality of man. I have been Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator. He has been Mr. E. Goodbye, guys.
Bye, everybody.